The text becomes shorter. The energy changes. The conversations that used to last hours start ending in minutes. And then, one day, without a dramatic ending, without a final argument, without the kind of closure that would at least make sense, the person who once gave you more patience, more understanding, more emotional availability than anyone you had ever known simply becomes unreachable. Not angry, not waiting, gone in a way that feels total and permanent and completely unlike anything they ever were before. Most people experience this as a mystery. They review the last few weeks. They cannot find the single moment that explains it. There was no explosion. There was no ultimatum. There was just a door that closed so quietly they didn't notice until they tried the handle and found nothing there. What most people will never understand is that the closing of that door was not a decision. It was the conclusion of a process that had been running, quietly, precisely, and with accumulating certainty, for far longer than they realized. And the reason they could not see it coming is the same reason they cannot reverse it now. They do not understand what an empath actually is, not at the level of experience, but at the level of biology. That is what this is about. Not the popular version of empaths, the sensitive soul, the emotional sponge, the person who cries at movies and feels deeply and needs extra care. That version is real as far as it goes. It just doesn't go very far. Beneath the experience of heightened emotional sensitivity is a nervous system that processes relational information with a specificity and a depth that most people's systems simply do not. And that nervous system, when certain specific things are done to it, does not respond the way people expect. It doesn't wound and wait to heal. It adapts. And adaptation, unlike hurt, cannot be reversed with an apology. Elaine Aron's research on high sensitivity, documented in the 1990s and replicated extensively since, identified that roughly 15 to 20% of the population processes sensory and emotional input with significantly greater depth and nuance than the rest. The nervous system of a highly sensitive person does not simply receive social information. It integrates it at a level that most people's brains are not structurally built to perform. This is not a character trait. It is a neurological architecture. The mirror neuron system, the neural network responsible for processing what others feel as though you are feeling it yourself, operates with higher functional intensity in people at the sensitive end of this spectrum. They do not imagine what you are feeling. They register it. The distinction matters because it means that when something is happening in the relationship, the empath is not interpreting it. They are experiencing it. That is the thing most people misunderstand first. When someone tells an empath that everything is fine when everything is not fine, the empath does not accept the statement. Their nervous system receives the statement and simultaneously receives the emotional reality underneath it. They feel both at once. This is not suspicion. It is not paranoia. It is the biological consequence of having a nervous system calibrated to read emotional reality directly rather than relying primarily on what is said. Most people construct their understanding of a relationship from what they are told and what they observe. An empath constructs theirs from what they feel, which is a significantly more accurate and significantly more difficult source of information to deceive. This is also why the things that destroy an empath's trust permanently are not the things most people think they are. It is not, in most cases, the dramatic betrayal. It is not the single catastrophic incident that ends everything in an obvious and undeniable way. People who do something clearly and comprehensively terrible to an empath often find that the empath still tries, still forgives, still extends patience, still offers another chance in a way that seems to contradict everything that was just done to them. This confuses people. It leads to the assumption that empaths are infinitely forgiving. That assumption is wrong, and understanding why it is wrong is understanding everything about what happens next. An empath does not forgive because they do not feel what was done. They forgive because what they feel is more than just the pain. They also feel the full weight of the other person's humanity, their complexity, their capacity for remorse. Their nervous system processes not just the betrayal, but the betrayer, and that processing creates a kind of understanding that temporarily overrides the wound. They see you, even when you are at your worst, especially when you are at your worst. But here is the mechanism that changes everything. The human brain's threat detection system, anchored in the amygdala and connected to the anterior cingulate cortex, the region that processes social pain with the same neural circuitry that processes physical pain, learns. It does not learn from information. It learns from pattern, and it learns with a ferocity and permanence that is proportional to the emotional significance of the experience it is encoding. When an empath is hurt, the event is not filed as a neutral data point. It is encoded as a high significance signal. The nervous system marks it. And when a similar signal arrives again, the marking deepens. This is not resentment. It is learning. The brain is doing precisely what brains are built to do, identifying patterns in a high-stakes social environment and updating the threat map accordingly. The problem is that the empath's threat map is updating with a precision and a depth that the other person cannot see and therefore cannot account for. They see the empath forgiving. They do not see the nervous system cataloging. And the catalog grows through specific actions, not necessarily dramatic ones, not necessarily conscious ones. The actions that permanently revoke an empath's trust tend to fall into a category that most people don't recognize as betrayal at all. Because most people's frame of reference for betrayal is based on what is said and done overtly. Empaths are not primarily harmed by what is done overtly. They are harmed by what is done beneath the surface of what appears. The first, and perhaps the most permanently damaging, is this: making the empath feel that what they feel is wrong. An empath picks up something in the room, a shift in tone, a withdrawal of warmth, an anxiety beneath a casual statement. They name it. Not accusatorially, they name it the way someone names what they see, because to them it is simply visible. And the response they receive is not clarification. It is dismissal. You're overthinking. That's not what I meant. You're too sensitive. You're making this into something it isn't. The first time this happens, the empath adjusts. They have been told their whole life that they feel too much, and they have a practiced relationship with the question of whether their perception is accurate. They absorb the doubt. They continue. The second time, the adjustment is slightly smaller. Something in the nervous system notes the discrepancy. The thing they felt was real, and the thing they were told was a projection. The gap between the two begins to register. The third, fourth, fifth time, the pattern is installed. And the pattern the nervous system has now installed is this: the person in front of me is not giving me accurate information about what is happening between us. My felt experience of this relationship is systematically more accurate than the narrative I am being offered about it. This is when the trust begins to die, not in a dramatic moment. In a quiet accumulation of discrepancies that the empath has been told to attribute to their own sensitivity rather than to what is actually happening. Researchers studying betrayal trauma, the specific psychological damage that results from betrayal by someone the nervous system is classified as safe, have documented that the harm of betrayal is not primarily the betrayal itself. It is the gap between what the person being betrayed knows and what they are permitted to know. When someone you trust tells you that what you are accurately perceiving is not real, You are not just being lied to. You are being asked to place your own perceptions below someone else's account of reality. For most people, this is unpleasant but manageable. For an empath whose felt perception of reality is their primary mode of understanding the world, it is a form of erasure. The second action that triggers permanent loss of trust is related but distinct: weaponizing the empath's understanding. Empaths, because they can feel what others feel, are unusually good at holding space for other people's pain. They listen without judgment. They tolerate complexity in others' emotional states. They stay present with someone who is struggling in a way that most people find exhausting. This is not simply a personality trait. It is the natural result of a nervous system that processes others' experience directly. Staying present with someone in pain is for an empath not a sacrifice of their comfort. It is an expression of their nature. What some people learn to do with this capacity is to use it selectively. They present themselves as vulnerable, as struggling, as in need, when it is useful for them to be received this way. They know, consciously or not, that the empath will meet this presentation with care, and they use that care as a mechanism for managing the empath rather than connecting with them. They do not show vulnerability because they are vulnerable. They show it because they have learned that it produces a particular response, and they need that response. An empath will not name this immediately. They will feel something wrong about it, something hollow at the center of the exchange, some absence where genuine feeling should be, but they will override the feeling because they have been trained by a lifetime of being told they overread to extend the benefit of the doubt. They will continue to offer care, and they will be consumed by it. But the nervous system keeps its record. At some point, and this point is different for every person, but its arrival is structurally inevitable, the record reaches a threshold. Stephen Porges, whose research on the polyvagal theory has been influential in understanding the nervous system's response to social safety and threat, documented the way the human nervous system doesn't simply react to perceived danger. It maintains what he described as an ongoing assessment of the social environment, registering whether the people around us are safe or potentially threatening. This assessment is not primarily cognitive. It operates below conscious awareness, reading micro-expressions, vocal tone, proximity, and the pattern of how people behave across time. For an empath, this system is extraordinarily well calibrated. When the nervous system ongoing assessment tips, when the accumulated pattern of discrepancies, of weaponized vulnerability, of dismissed perception crosses the threshold, something happens that is often described by empaths as a switch being flipped. One day, they simply feel differently, not angrier, not sadder, different in a more fundamental way. The warmth is gone, not suppressed, gone. The openness that characterized every prior interaction has been replaced by something quieter and more complete. And they cannot explain it in a way that makes sense to the other person, because they did not decide to feel this way. The nervous system decided for them. This is the reclassification. In behavioral terms, what has happened is that the nervous system has moved the other person from the category of safe to the category of threat. This is not metaphorical. Research on social threat processing shows that this reclassification changes how the brain allocates attention in the presence of the reclassified person, how it processes information from them, and how it manages the autonomic nervous system's arousal state when they are near. The person who was once a source of calm becomes a source of vigilance. And vigilance, in the nervous system's operating logic, is the opposite of openness. You cannot be fully vigilant and fully open at the same time. The nervous system does not allow it. This is why people find it impossible to understand what happened. So he experienced an empath who was consistently open, consistently forgiving, consistently available. And now they encounter a version of the same person who is none of those things, who is calm but unreachable, polite but distant, present in the room but absent in every way that previously mattered. They conclude the empath has changed. They are correct. But the change is not a personality shift or an emotional response to a specific incident. It is a nervous system completing an adaptation that has been underway for a very long time. The third action that permanently destroys trust is one that is almost never recognized as damaging at the time: deliberate emotional dishonesty, not about facts, but about intent. There is a difference between telling an empath something false and intending something beneath what you say while saying something else. An empath will miss a false statement about facts more readily than they will miss the gap between what you say and what you mean. They are not primarily calibrated to verbal content. They are calibrated to felt intent. And when those two things diverge consistently, when the words say one thing and the underlying emotional reality says another, the empath registers the divergence as a fundamental disruption of the relational contract. This is particularly damaging because it is so rarely intentional in a way the other person would recognize. Most people are not aware of the full extent to which what they intend and what they express are different. They believe they are communicating honestly because they are saying accurate things. They do not notice the layer beneath the words, the layer where what they actually want, actually fear, actually calculate is being transmitted. But the empath notices. The empath feels both layers simultaneously. And the experience of consistently receiving two different signals from the same person, one spoken, one felt, is the experience of not being able to trust what is real. Over time, this becomes intolerable in a specific and precise way, not dramatically, not explosively. The empath simply cannot be present in a relationship where the information they receive is systematically split between what is said and what is meant, because integrating that split requires an ongoing cognitive and emotional effort that eventually exhausts even the most patient and perceptive person. The nervous system's response to chronic ambiguity is not patience. It is withdrawal. First internal, then behavioral, then complete. The fourth action is the one most people see coming least: taking what the empath understands about you and using it as evidence against them. An empath who trusts you will tell you things about themselves that most people keep private. They will tell you how they process things, what they are afraid of, where they are vulnerable, what they need in order to feel safe. This is not naivety. It is the natural consequence of the kind of depth of relationship that empaths build, the kind where mutual understanding is the point, where emotional honesty is the language, where knowing someone fully and being fully known is the implicit contract. Empaths go first with this because they can feel whether it is safe to, and when they decide it is, they open completely. When someone takes that information, the specific fears, the particular vulnerabilities, the precise emotional pressure points that the empath disclosed in trust, and uses it in conflict, uses it to manage or manipulate or simply win, the damage is not simply that of a betrayal of confidence. The damage is structural. What the empath built their trust on was the belief that what they disclosed would be held carefully. When it is not, when the things they made themselves most vulnerable about are the things now being deployed as weapons, the foundation of the trust is not cracked. It is gone. There is nothing to repair because what would be repaired is not the original structure. The original structure required that specific safety to exist. It cannot exist again. The empath will not say this directly in most cases. They will not mount an argument. The response to this kind of betrayal, the use of disclosed vulnerability as ammunition, is not anger. It is clarity, a cold, complete operational clarity about what this person is and what this relationship is and what it will not be again. What happens after is the part that confuses people most. The empath becomes quiet, not sullen, quiet in a way that is more unsettling because it is clearly not temporary. They stop explaining. This is significant because empaths, up until a threshold, are remarkable explainers. They will work through a misunderstanding with a patience and a thoroughness that can feel inexhaustible. They will try repeatedly to help the other person understand what they experienced and why it matters, because they believe, based on everything they are, that understanding creates connection, and that connection can restore almost anything. When the explaining stops, it signals that the belief has changed. Not that the empath is too hurt to explain. That they have concluded the explaining will not produce the understanding they are reaching for. And that conclusion is not emotional. It is the product of evidence. Specific evidence accumulated over time, tested against repeated attempts to communicate, and finally, quietly confirmed. The empath stops explaining because they have become accurate. And accuracy, unlike hope, doesn't keep reaching. This is what most people interpret as coldness. It is not coldness. It is the absence of the forward motion that characterized every prior interaction. Empaths move toward people they are open to. When the openness closes, the forward motion stops. What looks like coldness is simply stillness, a person who is no longer going anywhere with you. The silence is not a strategy. It is not designed to punish or to communicate or to invite a particular response. This is the most difficult thing for the people who have lost an empath to accept, because they are looking for the door, the thing they can say, the change they can make, the gesture that will reopen what has been closed. They believe the silence is a message. They try to decode it. They try responding to it with grand gestures, with apologies, with demonstrations of change, with appeals to history, with reminders of what was good. None of it reaches the place they are trying to reach, because the silence is not a message. It is a completed process. The nervous system has finished its assessment and reached its conclusion, and that conclusion is not reversible by the same mechanism that made communication possible before, because that mechanism required an openness that the nervous system is no longer able to generate for this particular person in this particular relational context. Oxytocin research has documented the profound irony of bonding. The same hormonal system that creates deep trust also creates deep vulnerability to betrayal by the people you have trusted most. The higher the bond, the more precise the damage when the bond is used against you. An empath who trusted you completely, who let you into the deepest parts of their emotional world, who held your pain as though it were their own. That empath, when they reach the threshold, does not partially close. The closing is proportional to the opening. It is complete. And what lives on the other side of that closing is not anger, because anger is still a form of engagement. What lives there is something calmer and more final. It is the understanding of exactly what happened, what you were, what the relationship was, what you were using and what you were avoiding and what you were never willing to be honest about, held with a clarity that has no further use for resentment, because resentment requires the belief that something could still be different as just. The empath who has reached this place does not believe that. They know what you are. Not the worst version of you. They hold more than enough complexity for that. They know the operational reality of you in relation to them. They know what you did when you had access to their inner world. They know what you chose. And they know, with the certainty that only the body carries, that the version of them that was open to you does not exist anymore in the form you would need it to for anything to be possible. Most of the people who reach this understanding about empaths reach it too late. They understand the mechanism only after the mechanism has already run its full course. They understand what they did only after the person who could have felt their understanding is no longer in a place to receive it. There is a particular kind of grief in this for both people. The grief of the empath is real, though it is often mistaken for absence of feeling because it does not seek expression or comfort in the way that earlier grief did. The grief of the person who has lost an empath's trust is also real, and it often contains a quality of genuine confusion, because what they lost was the most attentive, most genuinely present relationship they had ever had, and they cannot fully account for how it ended. The account is this: you were given access to something rare, a nervous system that processed your experience as though it were their own, that felt your pain and your joy and your complexity without needing you to perform any of it. And the actions that ended it were not dramatic enough in isolation to read as the final tests they were. They were the patterns, the accumulated weight of specific interaction that told the empath's nervous system over time and with mounting certainty where you actually stood. And the nervous system heard it just. Long before the empath's conscious mind was ready to accept it, the nervous system had already reached its verdict. The warmth began to withdraw at the level of the autonomic response. The openness began to close at the level of threat assessment. By the time the empath was ready to name it, by the time the silence became total, the process had been complete for longer than either of you knew. This is what people who have lost empaths carry without being able to name it: the sense that the ending was further back than the ending appeared to be. That somewhere in the middle of what felt like a functioning relationship, something had already concluded. That the version of the empath who remained present and attentive in those later weeks and months was completing something, processing the last of what needed to be processed, not beginning again. The empath does not leave because of what you did. They leave because their nervous system, with the precision it was always calibrated to achieve, finally understood, completely and without remaining doubt, what you meant. Not what you said, what you meant. There is almost no more consequential distinction in human connection than that one. The gap between what people say and what they mean is where most relationships live. Slightly managed, slightly approximate, close enough. For most people, close enough is sufficient. They don't feel the gap with the precision that would make it unbearable. For an empath, the gap is always felt. Always. The question is only how long the nervous system concludes it can stay in the presence of it before the adaptation becomes necessary. When you understand this, the silence becomes readable for the first time. It is not withdrawal. It is arrival, the arrival of complete understanding. The empath, having felt everything that happened between you at the level of lived experience rather than narrative, has finally felt it completely. And what they now feel most completely is exactly what you meant. If that lands differently than you expected it to, if somewhere in what you've just heard you recognize something you've done, something you're still doing, something you didn't know was visible, then there's one more thing worth knowing. Most people who lose an empath's trust lose it over a long time, through a pattern of small and unremarkable moments, and they never understand how. The next video goes into exactly what it looks like when the process is still early, the specific signals that most people cannot read because they don't know what they're looking for. If this one mattered to you, that one is worth watching. And if you've watched a relationship end in a silence you still don't understand, the comment section is worth opening. you are not the only one reading this.